Friends and fellow citizens, I warmly congratulate you upon the highly interesting object which has caused you to assemble in such numbers and spirit as you have today. This occasion is in some respects remarkable. Wise and thoughtful men of our race who shall come after us and study the lessons of our history in the United States, who shall survey the long and dreary space over which we have traveled, who shall count the links in the great chain of events by which we have reached our present position, will make note of this occasion. They will think of it, and with a sense of manly pride and complacency. I congratulate you also upon the very favorable circumstances in which we meet today. They are high, inspiring, and uncommon. They lend grace, glory, and significance to the object for which we have met. Nowhere else in this great country, with its uncounted towns and cities, uncounted wealth, and immeasurable territory extending from sea to sea, could conditions be found more favorable to the success of this occasion than here. We stand today at the National Center to perform something like a national act, an act which is to go into history, and we are here where every pulsation of the national heart can be heard, felt, and reciprocated. Few facts could better illustrate the vast and wonderful change which has taken place in our condition as a people than the fact of our assembling here for the purpose we have today. Harmless, beautiful, proper, and praiseworthy as this demonstration is, I cannot forget that no such demonstration would have been tolerated here 20 years ago. The spirit of slavery and barbarism which still lingers to blight and destroy in some dark and distant parts of our country would have made our assembling here today the signal and excuse for opening upon us all the floodgates of wrath and violence. That we are here in peace today is a compliment and credit to American civilization, and a prophecy of still greater national enlightenment and progress in the future. We are here, with the stately pillars and the majestic dome of the capital of the nation looking down upon us. We are here, with the broad earth freshly adorned with the foliage and flowers of spring for our church, and all races, colors, and conditions of men for our congregation. In a word, we are here to express as best as we may, by appropriate forms and ceremonies, our grateful sense of vast, high, and preeminent services rendered to ourselves, to our race, to our country, and to the whole world. We are here. Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, he who can address this audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I have to this day. A feeling has crept over me, quite unfavorable to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. The task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I know that apologies of this sort are generally considered flat and unmeaning. I trust, however, that mine will not be so considered. Should I seem at ease, my appearance would much misrepresent me. The little experience I have had in addressing public meetings and county schoolhouses avails me nothing on the present occasion. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. You will not therefore be surprised if in what I have to say I evince no elaborate preparation, nor grace my speech with any high-sounding exordium. With little experience and with less learning, I have been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together, and trusting to your patient and generous indulgence, I will proceed to lay them before you. Thus, for the purpose of this celebration, Juneteenth is the birthday of national independence and our attempt at political freedom. This is to us what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries our minds back to the day and to the act of our great deliverance, and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of our national life, but it reminds us that the Republic of America is still young in its racial maturity. There is hope in the thoughts, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. The eye of the reformer is met with angry flashes, portending disastrous. It is with great pleasure and travesty that I have been honored to give commencement for the significance of the day that is referred to as Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, and Cell Liberation Day. It is because on this day of June 19, 1865, the Union General Gordon Granger read federal orders in Texas, which stated that all previously enslaved people in Texas shall be free. Although the Emancipation Proclamation had formally freed the enslaved Negro almost 2.5 years prior, and the American Civil War had largely ended with the defeat of the Confederate States, Texas was the most remote of the slave states, and with a low presence of Union troops, enforcement of the proclamation had been slow and inconsistent. Yet and still, even though the Negro has been set free, there seems to remain those who, in their own plight, continue to obliterate the life of the Negro. Although the Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for the 13th Amendment, what soon followed were a number of bogus laws which gave our government the right to strip away the newly gained rights of the Negro. By carefully inscribing within the Constitution the fact that a criminal is no longer to have the rights of an American citizen, this began the second era of tyranny on the Negro, and the mass incarceration of every homeless and jobless slave. Rather than rehabilitate the Negro, the seed of injustice was carefully planted into the Constitution and blossomed into the Jim Crow era, where separation was commonplace in our divided states of America. Jim Crow and mass incarceration had a baby and gave birth to the ugly and disfigured heathen of a child which we today call the justice system. It is this justice system which breeds the fate for far too many Negroes in far too many instances. The Negro continues to be incarcerated at disproportionate rates, stripped of his rights, strapped to a ball and chain, covered in pinstripes, his name blotted out of citizenship, and eventually he is branded with his new identity. No, it's not the name his loving and caring mother gave to him at birth, but his surname is inmate. Followed by a string of numbers, he is then forced back into manual labor, where he works day and night under the watch of wardens, guard dogs, and loaded muskets. He may not be picking cotton, but make no mistake, his daily toil is done in such a manner as to increase the spoils of the ever-rampant and gloriously profitable prison system. So I stand here today to speak directly to that prison system. I stand here to make defense for all the men who have been incarcerated unjustly, and most importantly, to speak for our slain ancestors, our ancestors who were murdered in cold blood in the backwoods of Alabama or strangled to death in the concrete jungles of Philadelphia. I am here to make defense for all the voices that have been choked out of existence, into which their last dying words were, "I can't breathe." Those of us that still have the precious treasure of breath should make it our most empathetic desire to ensure that the system which continues to protect and shield these licensed tyrants is brought under full federal investigation and they be held accountable for the sins which they have committed and that we see full rehabilitation. Before I assert my final defense for the thousands of slain ancestors who never received the opportunity to be a defendant in court, I must make note of two instances in particular, which are near and dear to me. The first story is as heinous as they come. The first story is of my wife's cousin. She, at the tender age of 15, was responsible for the nursing of her slave owner's infant child. It was her job to feed the baby if it cried and coddle it to sleep when it was weary. Yet on one summer morning, after being sleep-deprived for not one, not two, but 3 days in the middle of the night, the child began to cry. The cries went unheard by the sleep-deprived slave girl, and ultimately, the mother of the infant child awoke and witnessed the slave girl unmoved and unresponsive to the cries of the infant. In her anger towards the slave girl, she picked up a wooden board and struck the slave girl, breaking her nose and collarbone, which ultimately killed her. There was no trial, no remorse, no consequence for the killing of the slave girl, and it's in the restless spirit of her cries that I am here today. I feel compelled to also mention a slave by the name of Demby. You see, Demby was a runaway slave. Twice he had been caught, brought back to the plantation, and whipped until the lesions were as large as my little finger. But on the third attempt to run away, the slave keeper by the name of Mr. Gore chased the slave Demby to the water. Demby, in his brave-hearted spirit, chose to have a standoff with his oppressor and stood in the water waist-deep, refusing to come out to the dreaded call of his keeper. It was at that moment that Master Gore proclaimed that he would give Demby 3 chances to come out of the water and come back to the plantation. He then raised the barrel directly at his head and proceeded to shout, "Demby!" Demby, unwilling to return to his plantation, did not move a muscle. Twice more in the same manner he called his name, "Demby!" Upon the screaming of his name the third time, he hesitated not, but emptied the contents of the barrel into Demby's head, spilling his blood and brains into the water. There was a slight uprising of the Negro, but in the end the cries of the Negro went unheard, or at least as it appeared, since there were neither trial, charge, nor arrest made of Mr. Gore. The insensitive and heartless words of Mr. Gore were commonly known amongst the community as Negroes overheard him stating to his fellow slave owners and keepers that no one should raise a fuss over another dead Negro. In fact, they should give glory in the fact that the world had been rid of another Negro. Yes, sadly, Mr. Gore's motto was that it takes a half a penny to kill a Negro and another half to bury him. And although we have come a long way, I must state that we still have a long way to go. It is with that I make my final plea, Your Honor. Judge America, Mr. Uncle Sam, if you care for the life of the Negro as you claim you do, then hold men accountable for their individual actions. You have been conditioned to fear the sight of every Negro, from the brawny to the scrawny, from the educated to the ignorant. If your men are truly in such fear of the Negro, then they have no right to patrol us, and they should have no privilege of driving in our neighborhoods. You see, police are here to protect the community and to serve the community. But if fear screams louder than compassion, then what leads you to think that when they stroll into our neighborhoods with deadly weapons, mace and tasers, why Why would you believe that a man who fears us could find a place in his heart to serve us? You see, in order to serve, you must first love someone, and when you love someone, you will do everything in your power to shield the life of a person, no matter if they are mentally ill, drunk off wine, high off drugs, or carrying on like a baby throwing a temper tantrum. A cop without love is not a servant, no. A cop in fear is a ticking time bomb, ready to explode and empty his magazine in a power-crazed, psychotic fit of rage by the slightest move of his prey. No, you see, only a policeman who loves men should be given the honor of the shield. Love is patient. It's not quick to shoot a 12-year-old boy with a toy gun. No, love is kind. It doesn't slam a teenage girl into the concrete. Yes, love. So I petition better screening and better training so that a few bad apples are not allowed into the bunch. Train men properly and put them into territories where you know they have the best interest of the community they are patrolling at heart. It is with this final plea that I make my last defense, that the Negro is not 2/3 of a man, nor should he be considered property, but that we are all men, and all men are and should be treated as equals. We too are inventors, scientists, lawyers, doctors, judges, poets, servants, kings, queens, entertainers, lovers, protectors, and servants of this great land. Let this Juneteenth commemorate the day where America recognizes the fact that the Negro is not going anywhere. No, we are not going back to Africa via a plane nor slave ship. We are American citizens, and we are here.